The Dead Space series is known for having some of the hardest trophies in the horror game genre, and the Dead Space 2023 remake is no exception. The last trophy remaining before obtaining the Platinum trophy was Untouchable. Untouchable is earned for beating the game on Impossible mode. This mode actually has the same difficulty settings as hard mode, however all autosaves are now disabled and you only have one singular save slot. Finally, dying in this mode will delete the entire save. This means if you're unlucky enough to be killed by a necromorph or any of the environmental hazards, you'll have to restart the game from the very beginning. I'm sure that it won't come to that though. With all that in mind, it was time to see how bad Impossible mode truly is. Leading up to my first permadeath run, I had already completed a playthrough on medium difficulty and a New Game Plus playthrough, seeing the alternative ending and using only a plasma cutter. So I thought I knew what Dead Space had in store for me. We begin our Impossible run at the start of chapter 1. A quick rundown of what's happening in the story is that Isaac and his crewmates are on a repair mission for the USG Ishimura, but as they arrive, it seems to be abandoned. As we get jumped, we're able to get a good look at the Ishimura's new tenants, the necromorphs. In this early stage, we have no means of killing these things, being weaponless, so the only option is to run for the elevator. Luckily though, as we reach our new floor, a plasma cutter has kindly been left laying on the workbench. As a complete stranger to permadeath runs, knowing that any slip up could waste up to 8 hours of my life, it's safe to say that I was pretty nervous. Now, if you've seen any TV shows like The Walking Dead or the Resident Evil movies, you may think that aiming for the head is your best bet. Wrong. In this game, you have to rewire your brain to aim for their limbs instead of their head, which can sometimes be like asking your cat to bark. This is equally important in Impossible mode because ammo drops are drastically reduced. After my initial nerves had calmed, the remainder of the opening chapter wasn't really an issue. It was only when we were about to finish chapter 2 that I had my first problem. Your objective here is to retrieve the Ishimura's captain's rig to reveal what happened on the ship. He can be found in the ship's morgue, however after finding the dead captain, we are introduced to infectors. These bat-looking monsters are able to reanimate corpses and turn them into necromorphs. Now bearing in mind that we're in a morgue, that's a recipe for a disaster. Poetically, it was in the morgue that I had my first death of the challenge.
He died.
In my second run, I was feeling a little depressed after losing an hour's worth of progress. Luckily though, I was able to use what I'd learned prior to get me back to the morgue pretty quickly and put a plan in place to stop the infector. So, game plan here is we are going to grab the stasis, put it by the door, and once we grab the captain's rig, we're going to be grabbed by the necromorph version of the captain. We're going to freeze him, run away, and use El Grenade Launcher to make sure that thing makes no other zombies. Let's get on it. Touch him up. So you can get frozen in place. We'll be with you in a minute. You'll be out here having sex with someone. No more. And then we need some space anyway, so. With the morgue conquered, I pushed on to chapter 3. It was in chapter 3 that we make it to one of Dead Space's most infamous scenes, the gondola. Here we must refuel both the north and the south engines. Luckily, from my previous playthroughs, I recalled that throwables in this section can be your best friend. So after loading up the gondola, I took the journey across and launched explosives at the necromorphs waiting for me on the south side. After refueling the engine and stopping another alien sex party, we were able to make our way to the first potential run-ender of the game, the centrifuge. This section is actually very doable, but after seeing what happened to this poor fellow, it was enough to put me on edge. Eventually though, after swerving the rotating arm of the centrifuge, we were able to reignite the engines and meet up with Hammond in the captain's nest. He grants us security level 2 and sends us off to relink the ADS cannons to prevent any further asteroid damage to the ship. As soon as we leave Hammond, we run into one of Dead Space's mini-bosses. This is a brute. Now, if stasis wasn't a thing, I would definitely become this thing's next lunch. Unfortunately for him, stasis is a thing, and I actually took this thing out much more easily than the other regular necromorphs. With my confidence growing with every chapter, it was now time to go back to the medical deck to check for survivors in the chemical lab. As we arrived though, we are greeted by Dr. Mercer, who has totally Chris Hansen'd Isaac with a hologram of his girlfriend. It was here that we were introduced to the hunter. Imagine you spent the last few hours of your life retraining your brain to shoot off enemies' limbs instead of for the head. And then in walks this nightmare that doesn't play by those rules. The hunter has a special ability. It can regrow any part of its body that you shoot off. Being real, the hunter really isn't that bad because the shoot off a leg and stasis him strategy works pretty well and gives you enough time to escape while he's in stasis. To finish off the hunter once and for all, we must set a trap for him. So after locking him in a freezer, it was time to visit hydroponics to clean up the gas that had been contaminating the air. I did eventually find the culprit though. What is that noise? There were 8 band members that needed injecting. I had been told to do this by one of the surviving scientists, Dr. Cross. The reason for this was to weaken something she referred to as the Leviathan that was taking refuge in food storage. After all the injections had been administered to Weezer, it was time to flush the airlock, and to absolutely nobody's surprise, it didn't work, which means we're going to have to do this manually. Like the absolute Chad that Isaac is, he flies out into food storage and fights this behemoth of a necromorph. Although this is the game's first proper boss, it actually was nothing too challenging. My tactic was to strafe left and right, avoiding the tentacle attacks, and then when the Leviathan opened its mouth, I was able to fire back the projectiles it shot at me. After a few rounds, the monster is flushed out into space. Cross thanks us for saving her job, and then she asks us to look for her boyfriend, who's probably dead, who was last seen in the mining deck. So that's where we're off to next. It is in the mining deck that we have to clear the debris from the room before turning back on the gravity. Maybe I was a little bit unprepared, but I neglected the fact that the necromorphs have absolutely perfected the pincer movement and attacked me from both sides, resulting in this happening. Now that I'm extremely depressed after losing 3.5 hours worth of progress, it was once again back to the beginning. This time though, I was determined to put everything I learned thus far into practice to ensure that it really was third time lucky. Some of my main problems that I'd encountered on my previous 2 runs was ammunition, so as I entered the maintenance bay, this is where phase 1 of the ammo conservation project came into play. Stage 1 to this was to ensure that you use your surroundings effectively. For example, it is better to shoot 1 bullet at an explosive canister to take out a necromorph, rather than to use 6 trying to shoot off its limbs. Stage 2 was implemented in the main lab. This stage involved throwable items. Holding one of these beams does not use up any of your stasis, and even on impossible mode, a hit from one of these beams is an insta-kill. The third stage is actually a weapon. You find the Ripper in Chapter 3, and this gun fires a spinning saw blade that cuts into the necromorphs while also staggering them back so they can't hit you. Once this weapon is upgraded, duration of the blade can easily cut through 2 or 3 enemies, which saves you a lot of ammunition. With these tricks being put to good use, I managed to burn through the first few chapters, once again conquering the morgue, refuelling both engines at the gondola, taking out the brute, meeting the hunter, freezing the hunter, injecting the and shooting the Leviathan out of the airlock. Then it was time for round 2 in the mining bay. After narrowly overcoming the pincer movement that I fell victim to in my previous run, my nerves went up quicker than a contestant on Virgin Island as we managed to make it to the infamous asteroid room. In this room, the spinning arms are an insta-kill, which I also died many times to in my non-impossible mode playthrough. After successfully navigating the asteroid room, we head over to the control room to launch the SOS beacon into space, but we are then yet again reunited with our buddy the Hunter. All we can do here is freeze him in stasis and fight off the standard enemies while Daniels tries to unlock the door systems. As we escape the Hunter for the second time, we are able to make it back to the elevator to move on to the next chapter, but that didn't stop the necromorphs from trying to stop me. After leaving the necromorphs hanging, we are able to move into a much easier part of the playthrough, with barely anything that wants to make you its lunch. That is until we make it to the boss fight. In my initial run, it did take me a bit of time to figure out what I had to do here, but now on my third time at this point, I was more than confident enough. My tactic here was to glide to the central ADS cannon and blow a hole in the Leviathan, and then make my way over to the leftmost one, making sure to stay high to avoid the sweeping tentacle before unloading into the Necromorph, and finally making my way over to the right hand side to fire the final ADS cannon, making sure to stay out of the way of the tentacles again, whilst also trying to evade the space bogies. After a short fight though, the Leviathan destroys the final turret, leaving us to open fire on its weak point until we can finally pronounce the thing dead. At this point I was roughly 6 hours into an 8-hour long playthrough and had already lost my progress twice so far. So we begin chapter 9 as I board the USG Valor. While exploring the ship, we are introduced to Twitchers. No, not streamers. These Necromorphs are extremely fast compared to the other types. However, even with their enhanced speed, they are no match for the mighty Ripper. In this section, however, the Ripper would not be able to save me from the game's most notorious insta-kill spot. Here, your objective is to disarm the nuclear missile while making sure not to trigger any of the exploding enemies. I tried this in my first playthrough, and yeah, it didn't go so well. Now this bit is going to be really easy or really cancerous. So I think there's 3 guys. We want this. Luckily, I was able to rely on stage 2 of the ammo conservation project and found some throwable pipes that took care of the exploders, and the nuke was safely released into space. With the hardest part of chapter 9 completed, we pushed on to find Hammond having a showdown with a Necromorph, and we steal the Singularity Core from the Valor and head back to the Ishimura to book our ticket onto the getaway ship. Now that chapter 9 was out of the way, the end of the game was in sight. We made our way over to the crew deck to find the getaway spaceship, but I got a little distracted by Zero G Basketball. Zero G Basketball is an optional minigame where you compete against the clock in order to win prizes. There are 6 levels of Zero G Basketball to complete, so this meant it was time to channel my inner LeBron James. I could never tell whether it was my eyes bugging out or if some of the holes lit up and gave you additional points. I think so, but I couldn't really say for sure. With that out of the way, we once again came face to face with Dr. Mercer and Jacob Temple, Dr. Cross's boyfriend who was supposedly in the mining bay. Temple is refusing to help the Mad Doctor any further, so he kills him in the slowest way possible. Then Dr. Mercer turns his attention onto us and once again sets his dog, the Hunter, onto us. After shooting a few tentacles, the marker is released. The marker is the artifact that is controlling the Necromorphs. Now we are going to load this onto the escape ship and return it back where it was discovered on Aegis 7. Before that though, we had one last thing to do on the Ishimura before departing, and that was taking out Mercer's Hunter once and for all. After he decides to jump us, we line his ass up with the engines and burn him to a crisp. Unfortunately, the celebrations are cut short as the tentacle monster tries to drag us down to certain permadeath. Luckily though, Isaac has seen my Battlefield 4 video. Get in! The final thing we need to do before leaving the Ishimura is to take the marker out of storage. This can be a little bit tricky because once again the Necromorphs have perfected the pincer move as well as coming from all directions. However, at this point in the story I had assembled the Avengers of weapons. With the flamethrower, plasma cutter, pulse rifle and the Ripper, I dismantled every enemy that was thrown at me, and finally it was time to get the hell out of Dodge. After going past the point of no return, the ship takes us down to the planet below, Aegis 7. This is where the marker was originally found, so we're going to put it back where we found it. We are now in the final chapter of the game, and with nearly 8 hours played at this point, I would be nervous if it wasn't for the weapons that I had on me. Throughout chapter 12, we have to follow the marker through the compound, and eventually we place the marker on its pedestal, and then it was time to face the final boss, the Hive Mind. I won't lie to you and tell you this was the hardest boss I've ever fought. The only thing that had me on edge was knowing that if I ran out of health packs, or if I didn't evade the attacks, I would have to restart the run from the very beginning. Eventually, after the alien had opened its mouth and all the chesticles had been destroyed, we picked up by the monster, and it's time for the last bit of accuracy. This was a little nerve-wracking. Because there was no health bar, there was no way of telling how close or far away from death it was. As the final nodule is destroyed, we are thrown to the ground, and that is the end of the Hive Mind. We scramble back onto the ship and fly off into space, unlocking the Untouchable Trophy as well as the Concordance Officer Platinum Trophy. As I mentioned earlier, this is my first permadeath trophy that I've gone for so far. I know that both Dead Space 2 and 3, among many other games out there, have very hard trophies, and although stressful, I did enjoy making this video. So if you would like to see me go through even more pain, hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out. Also, if you haven't seen any of my platinum trophy videos, be sure to go and check those out as well. With that, I will see you all in the next one.